the postulation of the cosmic microwave background, it stems from the Big Bang theory, which, I mean, to be more precise, is a large family of theories, and there's still a great deal of work being done on those cosmological models. But for the sake of brevity and the interest of history, how did this connection between theory and observation, I have Einstein's general relativity and Hubble's observational cosmology in mind, culminate in early theories of the Big Bang?
Good. Well, trying to recall what I know of that history, which is before I got there, of course, in early 1900s, in the 19 teens even, people were discovering that distant galaxies were going away from us at rather substantial speeds. In 1929, Edwin Hubble published a graph showing the correlation between motions of the galaxies and the distance. And there's a correlation that is more or less linear, that in the sense that the farther away, the faster. And if you divide the distance by the speed, you get the apparent age of the universe. 1929 was that graph. As an observational scientist, Hubble was not immediately convinced that this meant the Big Bang theory was correct. I was never quite sure about that. As it turned out, it had been predicted twice already by theorists. In 1916 or so, we got Einstein's theory of general relativity, which told us about how gravity should work on large scales, including the whole infinite universe. So we had the equations of motion for the expanding universe, and Einstein tried to solve them, and he thought, well, of course, the universe must surely be static. So this is a well-known mistake that he made. He assumed the universe must be static. So in his equations, there was a place to put in an arbitrary constant that would enable that to be true. So that was his idea of the non-expanding universe. In 1922, Russian theorist Alexander Friedman used those same equations and said, no, actually, I think it's expanding. Nobody much noticed at the time. People who should have noticed but didn't. Was just after a war, after all. And Russia was poor and very heavily injured. 1927, George Lemaitre worked out those same equations and said the universe should be expanding from what he called it the primeval atom. Mm-hmm. So he had most of the same data that Hubble had, and he got more or less the same understanding of the expanding universe, but he wasn't an observing astronomer. He was a theorist. So it took a long time for him to be recognized for his work. In fact, when Einstein met him, he said, your mathematics is correct, your physics is abominable. So I don't know how Lemaitre felt about this, but then it took a little while before everybody recognized that Lemaitre was right. Yeah, now a lot of us are saying that what we used to call the Hubble law of expansion of the universe is now the Hubble-Lemaitre law. Lemaitre was an amazing, brilliant man who people mostly don't know about, but we should, because he made contributions in many areas. He was such a quiet fellow that he did not claim credit for his work as much as other people might have. Anyway, so we knew the universe is expanding in the sense that the galaxies are rushing apart from one another. That's 1929. And then 1940s, after the war was over, we knew the properties of neutrons because we'd been doing an awful lot of nuclear work. And now it was possible to calculate the properties of the early universe better. And Ralph Alpher and Robert Herman here in Washington made those calculations and predicted that the early universe should be about 5 degrees Kelvin, as we'd see it now after it's expanded, and that it should have produced about 20 or 25% helium, and the rest hydrogen. And both of those predictions turned out to be true. So that was their work, and so they got in front of the public a little bit, but nobody went to check their prediction that the cosmic heat that's left over from those early moments ought to still exist. So that was 1948. And it wasn't until 1964 that the data started to come in from the antenna at Holmdel, New Jersey, from Penzias and Wilson. And then they published theirs in 1965, and suddenly there was a much stronger bit of evidence about the expanding universe. We'd seen the heat. There's a story about that, too. Bob Wilson, one of those measuring people, an observational astronomer, said he didn't really believe that until he read about it in the New York Times.
That's funny.
So a lot of us experimenters are very cautious about believing our theoretical friends. And so anyway, that's how that whole thing got going. In between, there were predictions made about the abundances of the elements. If one guess would be, well, all of the chemical elements are produced in the Big Bang. And when you try to calculate it, though, you do not find that that's true. Only the hydrogen and helium are left over from the Big Bang, and all the rest of them are made some other way. So that process was worked out in the 1950s. And we're still working on it because many details matter, but nuclear reactions inside stars produce the other elements, the carbon, oxygen, nitrogen that you see around us. Some classes of stars produce the lighter elements, some produce the heavier ones. And it seems, among other surprises, that the heaviest elements, like gold, are produced in the collisions of two neutron stars when they merge to produce a black hole plus some debris. And so when you look at your ring or you look at the Webb telescope and say, where did that gold come from? Two merging neutron stars somewhere did that. That's a pretty amazing story.